A major development in a shocking case. Police outside Pittsburgh have found the remains of a fourth baby inside the home that this woman was evicted from. We also have new video from the inside, what the house allegedly looked like after Jessica Mauthe left. This video from the landlord who found one of the infants and called police.
My worker and I, we peeled the towels back with a stick, and then we seen they were just rotting, decomposing something in there, and I knew that it wasn't an animal.
We just got the criminal complaint that unveiled details that the horror that took place in this house allegedly went back years. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. As if this story we are following out of Western Pennsylvania couldn't get more disturbing, police say they have found the remains of a fourth infant inside a home that a woman was evicted from last month. Now, originally, police had said that they had found 3 dead infants inside the house, but now they are saying there is a fourth. Let me get you up to speed on this new information. This is the new video we have from inside the home in Cadogan Township, Pennsylvania. This is the home that the suspect in this story was evicted from last month. The landlord, 2 weeks after she left, came to check on the house and change the locks, and he found one of the dead babies inside. And this is the woman who we're talking about who's allegedly responsible for this. Her name is Jessica Mauthe. She is 38 years old, and she is currently in the Armstrong County, Pennsylvania jail, and she is being held without bond, and she is facing new charges that I'll tell you about in just a moment. But let me tell you a little bit more about Jessica Mauthe and what we know about her at this point. We do know that she was married to a man named Jacob Mauthe, and it appears that they got married around 2017 per social media. Now, publicly, Jessica posted a lot of pictures of the 2 sons that she has with Jacob Mauthe. They are 6 years old and 8 years old right now. We're blurring their faces to protect their identities. Now, Jacob is currently incarcerated per Pennsylvania prison records. I did find that he was sentenced in September of last year, and he's currently in state prison in Western PA. So for as long as potentially a year, Jacob's been out of the picture. And Jessica has been a single parent to these 2 boys. She and the boys lived in this house in Cadogan Township, Pennsylvania, which is northeast of Pittsburgh. It's a rural community, small town of less than 400 people. They rented the home, and their landlord told WPXI TV that Jessica's dad had passed away.
After her dad passed, the money stopped coming in. I don't know that she's ever physically paid me the rent. She would coax churches into paying the rent.
The landlord gave WTAE this video of Mauthe being evicted on August 14th. 2 weeks later, this story went to a whole new level. That landlord came back to the house. He was there to change the locks and check on the home, and just look at what he found that Mauthe allegedly left behind. The house was in complete disarray. You have mattresses that are on the floor. There's garbage everywhere, not to mention abandoned cats. Now, even before we talk about the dead infants, it's important to look at this and remember that there were 2 young boys living in these conditions. Their ages just 6 and 8 years old. But then the landlord made a shocking discovery, one that you just have to think would live with someone forever. Here is him telling WPXI in his own words about what he found.
3 or 4 different garbage bags, tight. That's why she's where she's at.
That landlord found a baby, dead, wrapped in plastic in a closet. He then called police. Initially, police said they found 2 more deceased infants inside that home. They were hidden in totes in the attic of the house. I have the criminal complaint that unveils what police say Mauthe told them when she was interrogated at a state police barracks near where she lived. So let me warn you before I get into this, this is very graphic, what she allegedly claims happened. And this goes back as long as 6 years. Now, she gave birth to the infant that the landlord allegedly found, she says, about a year ago. She said that she was seated on the toilet when she birthed the infant, and she said that infant remained in the toilet for several minutes, and she could hear that infant making noise. She then allegedly took the infant from the toilet, wrapped a towel around its body, its face, and its head, and held the baby against her until it stopped making noises and stopped breathing. She then put the baby in a plastic bag and put the baby in the bedroom closet, and that is where the landlord allegedly found the child a year later. Now, as far as the babies in the attic, the criminal complaint says that Mauthe gave birth to another infant on the toilet. She says that infant on the toilet was in the water for roughly 15 minutes, and she says that she never heard that baby make any sounds. She then took the child and wrapped it in towels and plastic bags and placed the baby in the attic. The complaint doesn't say how long ago it is believed that this happened. But then the other child that was found in the attic, the third infant whose remains were found, Mauthe claims she gave birth to 6 years ago. She allegedly birthed the infant into her hands in the bathroom. She says she then passed out, and when she woke up, she was on top of that infant, and the infant was not breathing. She then put the baby's body in a tote and put the child in the attic. The complaint says she never sought any help or medical attention for these children. Then there's the bombshell today, learning that police have found the remains of a fourth infant in this home. It is unclear what Mauthe's story is for that child and how that child fits into the timeline that now at this point goes back as long as 6 years allegedly. All 4 of those children were found either in a bedroom or in the attic of the home. Now we are waiting on autopsy results for the babies to learn about how all of them, all 4, died. Now we don't know when Mauthe gave birth to the other babies, whether they were alive at the time or whether they were stillborn. And that could be a major development in this story in terms of the charges that Mauthe will face. We also don't know at this point who the father is of these 4 babies, whether there's multiple fathers to these children. Now, here are the new charges that Mauthe is now facing. There's 1 count of criminal homicide, count of involuntary manslaughter, 4 counts of concealing the death of a child, and 4 counts of abuse of corpse. Neighbors said that Mauthe's 2 sons were often raised by other people in the neighborhood, that there was no structure in the house. And when you look at the video from inside the home, that makes sense. It's unclear where the 6- and 8-year-old are right now. One neighbor said that he had no idea that Mauthe was ever pregnant in the time that she lived in the house. Now, before we break down what these new charges mean, how they could change with former Deputy Attorney General of Ohio, Mark Weaver, I do want to shed some light on what I found out about Jacob Mauthe, the husband of Jessica, who is serving prison time. Jacob Mauthe's sentence stems from an incident in June 2023. It made the local newspaper, the Leader Times. In an article, they write that Mauthe was arrested on a 3rd-degree felony endangering the welfare of children, 1st-degree misdemeanor endangering the welfare of children, misdemeanor DUI, general impairment, damage to unattended vehicle or property, and driving while license is suspended, which was his 2nd offense. In June of 2023, police in South Buffalo Township, Pennsylvania, arrested Jacob for allegedly driving drunk with 2 kids in the car. They said that he backed into a garage at a local post office. The article says that he was in his PJs and he could barely stand. Mauthe, the newspaper said, drove his wife to work, and then he was taking his 2 kids to a t-ball game, and that is just sad. Records show that he was sentenced in September of last year. Now, it's unclear how long he is going to be in prison for, and it's unclear whether he is the dad of any of the 4 infants who were found dead inside the home that his wife was renting. Joining us now to talk more about this is prosecutor and former Deputy Attorney General of Ohio, Mark Weaver. Thank you as always for being with us on Law and Crime. There's really just no words for the information that keeps coming out on this story. What do you make of these new charges? And we're still waiting for autopsy results, but what do you take away from what Jessica Mauthe is now charged with?
Prosecutors in Pennsylvania, we call them district attorneys. Prosecutors want to charge whatever they can early on to hold the defendant as the investigation continues. So they've charged her with a series of charges, not all of which are 1st-degree felonies. They could be, depending on what the medical examiner in nearby Indiana County tells us, based on were these children born alive? Could they have lived if they were born alive? And if the answer is yes on all 4 of these children, you might see these charges upgraded to 4 1st-degree felonies, which in Pennsylvania are punishable by up to 10 to 20 years in prison each.
When you look at what she reportedly told investigators, and it's incredibly graphic, frankly, to talk about, but she said she was on the toilet and she gave birth to a child. That child was making noises. She took the child, wrapped the child in a towel or some sort of plastic, and the child stopped making noises. At that point, and she is charged with criminal homicide, what do you make? I mean, even if the other, the three other children, gosh, but even with that alone, I mean, is that something that could put her in prison for the rest of her life?
Yeah, depending on the judge and depending what else we find out, my sense is, having done a lot of cases over the years, is that she is under confessing. She's admitting just the basic facts of a couple of these things in hopes that the investigators won't be able to learn more. If you and I are talking about this case weeks or months from now, I would imagine we're going to have more information, either from her, if she continues to cooperate and talk, or from information found from these autopsies. But rarely will a defendant acknowledge all of their culpability at the outset. Normally they will minimize their culpability.
And sadly, this story, and there's one that comes to mind, a separate case that we've been talking about recently, very different in a lot of ways, is Lake and Snelling out of Kentucky. And the question about whether her child was stillbirth, was it a stillbirth, or was this something where that child had a breath outside the womb? For people just kind of understanding what investigators are looking for at this point, how would, if they can determine if these three other children had a breath when they were born, how that could impact the case?
Yeah, obviously a child who's born dead, a stillborn child, you can't commit murder on that child. The charge you might be able to be brought against is abuse of a corpse. In some states, there's a charge of not notifying the authorities of a stillborn baby. But what investigators want to know is, number one, were the children born alive? Did they take a breath? Number two, could they have lived? Had they received any medical care, maternal care, anything at all? We all know how vulnerable infants are in that first few hours of life. And normally just being warmed up and clearing their mouth out of whatever's in their mouth is enough to get them into a healthy state. Now, the decomposition of these poor infants' bodies might be an impediment to the medical examiner being able to tell us all of that. But given how much time she could face, potentially on 4 charges, this might very well resolve at a plea agreement where she agrees to, say, 20 or 25 years.
For it seems in terms, too, of the under-admitting about what happened, because initially law enforcement had said that they had found 3 bodies, and she had reportedly admitted to law enforcement that she gave birth to those 3 children in the home, and now there's a 4th. What does that tell you about this investigation, what she's telling law enforcement? I'm just like, this story, and there's few that have me at a loss for words, but it's so horrific.
I've talked to a lot of juries after cases I've prosecuted, and what I've found is that people are willing to forgive a mistake. Jurors are just like the rest of us. They're just citizens who are called for jury duty. And so if this were a one infant situation, you could see some jurors feeling sorry for this mother. She was in a tough situation. 2, 3, 4 dead babies is a horrible pattern. It shows extremely deviant, or if you will, disregard for human life. And it's hard to imagine any juror, male, female, young, old, having sympathy for this woman who, after the first one, perhaps should have learned her lesson, and now we have 4 dead infants.
Part for me, too, that I keep trying to do in my mind is if they were full-term pregnancies, you're thinking 9 months, and she wasn't in the home, I think, for more than a year. Like, how was this? I guess if you're an investigator, how do you go through, like, in determining the timeline of how it took place? Because it seems like this could have taken, and I don't know, and there's a lot that we don't know in terms of how old these children were, when she gave birth, but it just seems like this could be something that went on longer than just the period of time she was in this home.
Yeah, we all know the math about how long it takes to make a baby. and we're going to find out how long she had access to this apartment. I've not read anything in the documents I've reviewed about twins or triplets. That could be explanatory. That's something that investigators will certainly be able to find out by examining DNA. Even a decomposed body will produce DNA that will tell you whether two different infants were twins or three of them were triplets. She also could have had access to this property even when not living there. We just don't know enough about those facts. I also will predict that her public defender will probably advance some sort of lack of capacity defense. Given these facts and given what she's already told investigators, I've never practiced criminal defense law. I've always been on the prosecution side of things, but I imagine defense lawyers would have very few avenues other than either diminished capacity or seeking a plea agreement where she might be able to get out of prison in her 50s or 60s.
From a prosecutorial standpoint, because you have her admitting at this point to it seems, if everything's true that's been reported, this criminal homicide charge, would you want to make a plea deal? If you could, if you seem to have a lot of evidence at this point that would be able to put her in jail and put her in front of a jury and get a long sentence.
This is a rural part of Pennsylvania. I'm a native Pennsylvanian. I know the Commonwealth pretty well. This is conservative country. This is the district attorneys tend to be more conservative. The juries tend to be more conservative. I could see a district attorney wanting to advance this case without much of a plea bargain unless he could get a significant prison sentence. It's received national attention. We're talking about it here on Law&Crime. So I'd be surprised if there were a small plea bargain. It would either be a serious plea bargain for decades in prison or this DA will take this woman to trial.
You might have already talked about this at the top, but I see that there's a criminal homicide count that she's facing and also involuntary manslaughter. Just as we're waiting for more information about all 4 children and how they died, what do you make of that involuntary manslaughter count and what that could be related to? One
of the accounts she gave with one of the infants was that she gave birth, she heard a noise, and then she passed out. And so perhaps the prosecutors imagining that this diminishes her mens rea, which state of mind, about whether or not she allowed this child to die. Many of these early charges are placeholder charges. They're the minimum charges that can be brought. You also want to hold the defendant in custody if possible, and they can be upgraded when we get more medical information from the medical examiner, in this case from Indiana County, a nearby county. It's a rural county. I've looked at it on a map just where this house was. So it's not, you're outside Pittsburgh, but to your point, it's a very rural county. And I think a big question that may not be able to be answered now is just, how could this happen? Like, how does someone slip through the cracks, it seems, where no one could have known that this happened not one time, but allegedly 4 times? We've all heard stories about women who have concealed their pregnancies from their friends, even some of their family members. Perhaps they already weighed a lot and you couldn't tell they were pregnant. But having it happen 4 times strikes me as really hard to believe. I don't see a legal obligation on friends or family members to take some sort of action. That would be unusual. Certainly there's a moral obligation for someone to speak into this life of this woman if they know what's happening. Either way, we have 4 dead infants. We're not sure whether they were born alive. At least 1 or 2 of them was, according to her own admission. So this is the kind of case that's only probably going to get worse as we get more information from the medical examiner.
I don't know if you've seen some of the images of inside the home that the landlord took. And I mean, it's in complete disarray. She gets evicted from the house. I mean, there's like a mattress in the middle of, and it's just, how does it, a lot of us could look at that and say, how does it get to that point? But when you look at that, and I think about cases of neglect, and she had 2 children there, I guess what is your reaction when you see something like that? Because there's also this 6-year-old and this 8-year-old that she did have, and people knew that she had. And what's the line typically when it comes to law enforcement looking and saying that this is a case of neglect?
Most cases of neglect are handled by the local county children's service department, which has the ability to remove the child and place the child in a safe environment. Occasionally it results in criminal charges in the most serious cases. But more typically, and just for viewers, if you know of somebody who's raising children in an absolute dump of a house where it's not clean and perhaps animal feces are scattered around, or food scraps, or infestation by rats or insects. That's something you call children's services about. Children should not be raised in that environment. And I suppose, you could add other charges if these babies were alive for any period of time. Having a baby in a very unsanitary environment and not taking it to a safer place itself could bring about a charge of child endangering. But the child endangering charges are the least of this defendant's worries right now.
And talking about her husband, because his court records that we found, the offense happened on June 6th, 2023. I'll just run through them real quick. It was a DUI. DUI, that was his first offense for that. Endangering the welfare of children, some sort of property damage charge, and then driving with a suspended license. It was his second violation. Records show he went to prison. He was sentenced in September, and then the record shows that he was in the state prison in Western PA starting in March. What do you make of those charges? Because that seems to be a major point in this, is that once he was out of the picture, she becomes a single parent. Not excusing any of this, but that had a major impact on her life and her ability to care for children.
Yeah, it sounds like there's something more to those charges. Rarely do you see first or second time DUI defendants go to state prison. So there's probably something else, previous record. If her defense counsel went to trial and tried to suggest that she had a greater burden because she was a single mother and therefore maybe killing these infants was the only logical thing to do, I doubt it works. It probably backfires and it offends single mothers in the jury who are making do just fine, thank you very much, without a man in the house. And so defense lawyers are frustrated because they often only have whatever facts their clients give them. And so either they're going to be in a hurry to get a plea deal, or they're going to be trying some pretty flimsy defenses, and that could be one of them.
And I think a big part of this story too in this investigation will be like, who's the parent, who's the father of these 4 children? Because if the dad has been out of the home in a year, and since September of last year when he was sentenced, or at least since March, how do you go about figuring out who the fathers are? Or maybe it's Jacob Mauthe who's in prison, maybe it's someone else. How important is it if you're a prosecutor charging Jessica Mauthe that you figure out if there was anybody else involved in this?
We try to answer the questions that jurors might have when they go back to deliberate, and certainly jurors might want to know who the fathers were. They are not a part of the essential elements of proving the case. If we have the DNA of the father, that could be matched against the DNA found in these dead infant bodies. Pretty quickly we'll know whether this father was the father of these 3 or 4 babies. But that is not one of the things the prosecutor has to prove. The prosecutor has to prove that the child was alive, that this woman knew the child was alive, and that she either caused their death or allowed the child to die without medical care.
And then just lastly, Mark, I think about Armstrong County, Pennsylvania. It's a rural county. Typically, you don't have national news stories there. You as a prosecutor, what is it like for those prosecutors in a rural county where you're probably not dealing with regularly these high-profile cases like this, and then suddenly a story that not just has the attention of Western PA, but of the nation, and they're looking to you to get a conviction?
Yeah, in most rural courthouses across the country, and I prosecuted cases in 12 different counties across Ohio, many of them rural, the trials are held with very few people in attendance, a few family members, maybe some courthouse observers, very, very little, if any, media. But then when a big case like this hits, it changes, and you have TV trucks outside and reporters. I prosecuted, along with a couple other prosecutors, a serial killer in Ashland County, Ohio. It was a death penalty case, and it was covered live here on Law&Crime. And that's the first time in many, many years that small rural county had seen that much media, but it was a multiple murder serial death penalty case, and so the media came because people wanted to know what's going on. That could happen if this trial goes forward.
Yeah, so many questions still unanswered at this point, but we're starting to learn a little bit more. What a horrific case out of Western Pennsylvania. Mark Weaver, it's always great to have you on Law&Crime. Thanks for your perspective on this.
A sad case, but thanks for having me.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law&Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.